We're alive. It's been how long since the last one?
Together, us?
Yeah. When was that?
About 4 days before your wedding, so that would be about almost 3 years, 2
Almost.
years.
Oh my.
2
Oh,
years.
that's just.
No,
I can see it here too. We're good.
Okay, yeah.
We have our behind-the-scenes specialist checking out on the preview and everything.
So
but
almost 3 years.
Wow.
It'll be 3 years in November, and what are we now? June? July.
yeah, we're into
July.
July.
September, October, November. 4 months shy of 3 years.
Wow. We were hoping to visit you down. For those who don't know, this is my father-in-law officially. Last time you weren't quite yet.
A pretend father-in-law.
Yeah,
Almost father-in-law.
Potential father-in-law, depending on, how good of a husband I could be.
Yeah.
So we're still good. We're in the green.
We're in the green.
made it so far.
Still in the good books.
We're still in the good books. And last time, I don't know what inspired, but we were doing live streams way back in 2018, and you were obviously visiting for the wedding.
I came a week before the wedding, and it's
Uh-huh.
a week that I'll never forget. It'll go down in infamy.
I hope for good reasons.
Well, it was for good reasons, ultimately, but in the middle of that week, some very tragic events took place.
The fire, yeah.
But if you have a minute, I'll just rehash that weekend from my
Yeah,
perspective,
for
or
sure.
that week.
That people are just getting notified now, so it's perfect warm up
Okay,
for
this is a
everybody.
warm-up.
Yeah.
My sister and my brother-in-law, her husband, decided that they wanted to come over to America
Right.
to meet the new Louise's new husband or future husband, fiance.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's an airline captain with Qantas, and he flew the 747 from Sydney to San Francisco
Wow.
with my sister and myself on board.
Does that count as a jumbo jet?
Yeah, that's the
jumbo jet.
that is the jet. Until the A380 came along.
Right.
The 747. He flew a 747 400, which is the stretch upper deck,
I see. Gotcha.
and that was the jumbo jet,
Mhm.
the 747. So
Wow.
we arrived in San Francisco on Friday or Saturday evening. The wedding was going to be the next Saturday, the 11th
Right.
of November,
Veterans Day.
Veterans Day. And I rented a car, and the three of us drove up from San Francisco to Oroville, and we had a lovely dinner. Was it that night or the next night with your
Mhm.
parents at their former home?
Mm-hmm.
And
It's
then
all gone now.
the next Monday, the day after, I drove them back to San Francisco so that he could fly the 747 back to Sydney. He had to, so he couldn't stay for the wedding.
So he flew it both ways.
Oh yeah, that's what they do.
That makes sense. They're not wasting any money
No.
on that flight.
So, like, if we captured him and kidnapped him and kept him in wherever it was we are,
yeah.
he would not be able to fly the 747 back,
Wow.
and it probably would be still sitting on the ramp at San Francisco. No, I'm
They
just
never
joking,
would
of
have
course.
left.
Never would
And
have
everyone
left.
who bought that plane ticket.
Yeah, would have.
We had a lot of power.
They'll be still sitting on the plane waiting for it to take
Yeah.
off.
We had a lot of power then.
Yeah,
We could-
did.
we could
could
hold-
but
hold back
luckily
the whole
we
thing.
didn't abuse it.
Yeah, we were
But
good.
anyway,
We're good.
on the Tuesday, Louise said to me, that's Drew's future wife at that time,
At that time. Current wife now.
would you mind going over and staying at Drew's studio tonight because I've got my hens party? So I came
Hens
over.
party, is that what they call it?
What do you call it here?
Bachelorette party, right?
All right, hens party, bachelorette party.
Is that a you saying, or is that just Australia?
I
that
think it's
says-
just Australian term.
Oh, interesting. I never heard that.
Yeah, bachelorette
Hens
party.
party.
Okay. And,
Yeah.
and you also had
I
stag
like
night.
hens.
You call it a stag night. We call it a bucks night in
I
Australia.
never heard stag night either. I don't know.
Well, what's a bucks night? That's when
I don't know.
I don't know. You didn't have one. That's when all the guys.
Bachelor party?
Yeah, bachelor party.
That's what we call it.
All right. Okay. So
There's
confusion.
probably-
confusion reigns supreme.
This
here.
says how much I'm disconnected from my own culture
Yeah.
because I've been in this room for
Don't
about
worry.
2 years.
It doesn't matter.
So hens night.
So anyway,
Gotcha. I
that
like that.
night Louise had her bachelorette party.
Yeah.
And so I came over, and you said, "Oh, we're just about to make a show, and it's on Twitch
Oh, wow.
TV."
Right. This was back when we were streaming on Twitch for all the talks streams. Now we mostly do these on YouTube, but yeah.
But anyway, I thought, "Oh, this is really cool. I've never been on TV before," and some guy, like, you type in, like you've got.
We see your messages, by the way. So if you guys want to ask, like Ben Close just said, happy Sunday morning from New Zealand.
Oh, Kiwis.
So he's closer
They're
to
our
you.
brothers.
Yeah, he's closer to your hometown.
Yeah.
And Jonathan Honeywell says it's nice to get an inside look at family.
Oh, okay.
So-
Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah.
I'll
Ask away if you want.
just say this. It was really eye-opening because one guy said, just like on that, he said, "Who's that guy sitting next to you, Drew?" And you said, "Oh, this is my future father-in-law." And he says, "Oh, he's got a really cool accent." and he said, "What does he do?" And you said, "Oh, he's a pilot." And the next question was, "What's it like to fly the Concorde?" Like,
Right
I'm
away.
the Concorde expert.
Right.
Then we were going up and down and talking about gliders and helicopters and Concordes and 747s and
No hesitation. They went straight to Concorde.
Yeah,
right after
fast
pilot.
tracking it.
Yeah, that you must know about every plane. What's it like flying the SR-71
Oh, yeah, well.
Blackbird?
Well, that was
Yeah.
anyway. So that night I stayed at the studio,
Mm-hmm.
and the next morning, I guess I can tell them about the fires.
Yeah, yeah.
The next morning, a town not far from where we're at was completely annihilated by a fire that was caused supposedly by PG&E.
I'm pretty sure that was.
And it
confirmed.
started like at
Yeah.
8 o'clock in the morning, and by 10 o'clock, 2,000 or 3,000 acres had been destroyed, and by
Very
noon,
populated area.
very
too.
densely populated, very highly wooded town
Right.
called Paradise.
Yeah.
And it was just like a tinderbox. It was a perfect storm because you
Mhm.
had the drought, you had a lot of ground debris.
Pretty late in the year too.
Yeah.
Which is November is typically not when you'd expect wildfire season.
So
but
anyway, by
yeah.
about 10 o'clock that morning, just about the entire town of what was about 40,000 people
probably
was
yeah.
completely emblazoned and engulfed by massive flames, and the few roads out of town were completely blocked with traffic,
Oh,
trying to get out of town. Just like my ex-wife who lived there, she didn't
Mhm.
even have time to go home and get anything out of the house. She was
Right.
at work, and she was told, "Go and get your daughter from school, grab her, and then get out of town." They didn't even go when they left to go to work and school that morning.
Mhm.
They were assuming they'd be home in the afternoon or evening.
Right, right. They weren't.
They
thinking-
didn't. They'd left everything in their house, and their house
Yeah.
was completely destroyed. As were hundreds, probably 1,000 structures in Paradise were destroyed. And initially, it was thought that there were thousands of people actually trapped in the town and burnt.
Mm.
But later on, when they did a roll call and everybody got assembled, and they went to the Walmarts and the Rayleighs and other parking lots to
Right.
figure out
Evacuation points.
evacuation
Yeah.
points, they figured out that it wasn't that many. I think in the end it was less than 100 who had died, but still very tragic.
Right. As far as wildfires go, it was one of the deadliest.
Yeah,
In the country.
and speaking as an Australian, in my town in Australia, we had a similar event just 18 months ago called
Mhm.
the Gospers Mountain Fire, just west of Sydney. And in my street in the Blue Mountains, we lost 6 houses, but
Wow.
because our neighbourhood is much less densely population, the casualty toll was much less.
Well, that's good. Good.
Yeah, but in terms of sheer square miles burnt, that fire, the Gospers Mountain Fire, was one of the biggest
Ooh.
ever in Australia.
Wow.
But no big towns like Paradise were
Right.
destroyed.
That was just a perfect storm. Rockford Media is asking if you're Australian, but he probably just answered that question.
No, I'm British.
Yeah.
No, of course
And
not.
this
Thank
is
you, Rockford.
Joseph asking what his name is, which is
Pete.
Pete.
Or
So we
Peter.
could, if we have you on regularly, we can have a recurring name for this. What's neat with Pete?
Could you repeat, Pete?
Repeat Pete. We'll have
That's
some
when I
name
come
for
on
it.
again.
Yeah, we'll have to make this a tradition every
A
time
repeat.
you visit. A repeat.
Yeah.
I like that. That's good. People are.
Those letters are so small.
Yeah, this is Louise's dad. For those
Oh.
curious. Louise is half Filipino, half Australian.
Yeah, that's right.
So you provide the Australian side.
Yeah, and so Louise's mum was the one that I was referring to. She was the one in Paradise when the fire
Yes.
came, and
Mhm.
her daughter from second marriage,
Mm-hmm.
she had to go back to the elementary school in Paradise to pick her up.
Mm.
Didn't have a minute of time to go back to their house and collect any valuables or any
Oh yeah.
mementos. Then her priority was just to get out of town,
Mhm.
get down to a safe place.
Right.
And it took her about 3 hours. And listening, well, to follow up, to finish up on this story,
Mm-hmm.
Louise and Drew got married the following Saturday. Now, this is Wednesday, so
Mm-hmm.
3 or 4 days later, on the 11th of November,
Right.
their wedding was scheduled to happen. And, of course, it still went ahead, even though the surrounding
Ash.
atmosphere was
Yeah.
just so... You would be crying with tears from the smoke getting in your eyes. And
Yeah.
the house in the house where you got married was completely covered in ash, and even the neighbors during the wedding, the marriage ceremony, were warning us that we may have to evacuate at any moment.
Right. A lot of this equipment you're seeing in the office, like my iMac and my cameras, we threw in the trunk of my car as we were going on the honeymoon because we weren't sure if we were going to have to say goodbye to everything.
So take it with you on the honeymoon.
Yeah, so I had all this stuff in the car with us because we weren't sure what was going to happen.
Oh, the car was loaded with cameras, but nothing else.
Yeah.
You had no clothes. No.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm glad this time you get to visit. It doesn't.
It's
appear-
a little bit less dramatic.
It's still very hot.
Very hot.
But less smoky. But Rockford Media had a question for you specifically. I go live all the time, guys, so don't ask me questions. This is this is your time to ask him. He's asking what you thought of me when you first met me.
Before I met you, Drew, Louise had shown me a picture of you, and I think you must have gone to a concert somewhere.
Uh-oh.
And I thought, oh, he's a pretty nice looking guy. He looks like a young Bill Gates. Well, I hope you don't take that the wrong way, Drew. But
I hope a notch above.
but anyway,
Less money, better looks.
I've got a few stories, and Louise might not agree with them, but I think Louise came with me to visit with me in Australia for about 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, Louise was talking to me about you on the odd occasion here and there, and talking about your parents, and
Oh yeah, yeah.
she'd obviously already known you quite well by then.
Right.
And I said to Louise, why don't you, when I get back to Florida, invite him over to come and visit? Now, you were still very young then. You'd probably never even been on an airplane before.
Oh,
But anyway, I said
Not
to
that young.
Louise, why don't you invite Drew over to stay with us? I used to live in a place called Melbourne Beach on the east coast of the US near the Kennedy Space Center.
and those vlogs are still up. I videoed
they?
those trips on this channel. Yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, so have a look at those and give them a thumbs up and a like if you like them.
Or a dislike.
just plugging, giving me a plug. So
As long as it's him.
anyway, so I'm at the house in Australia, and Louise says, "Oh, I just spoke to Drew, and Drew's parents said that he can't come to Florida unless we're dating." Now, I might have got this wrong, but the next day, Louise came into the kitchen, and she was really buoyant and very excited. And she says, "Guess what, Dad? Louise and I are dating." I mean, Drew and I
Drew
are
and I
dating.
date,
Drew
yeah.
and I are officially dating now.
There was a bit of fibbing on my part because my mom and dad didn't have an issue with that, but Louise and I were in what many would call the friend zone at that time.
Oh, not
Of like,
that's a different level.
we weren't dating yet. We weren't official, but we were talking a lot.
Yeah.
And I was debating internally if I was willing to go on the trip and stay there if we're not official, if we're just friends.
So
I don't know if I wanted
Well,
to commit that much to
Yeah.
a friendship if it's
that's
just
at that early stage.
at that stage. So I was like,
Yeah.
maybe if we were dating I could justify it, but if we're not on that
Well, anyway, so Louise
level
was
yet,
absolutely buoyant and jubilant, and she said, "So now Drew can come." So then we made arrangements, and we drove over to Orlando. When we got back to the States from that trip to Australia, we drove over to Orlando and we picked you up at the airport, and that's when I first met you.
I remember that day.
And I thought, well, he's a pretty nice young fellow, and I think that the dating part's pretty. But at that stage, of course, marriage was not even on the radar.
Yeah, we're not even close.
Not
to
even
there.
close.
But
Oh, go ahead.
you're not bringing up the part that I broke your car the first 30 seconds we met. Remember that?
I don't remember that.
We got into your Mercedes, right?
The old one.
The blue one?
Yeah, the 280 SE.
The 280 SE.
Yeah.
And we'd first gotten in. It was very humid. It was my first time in Florida. I'd never been there before. And I took my backpack off and dropped it off, and it was pretty noisy from all the cars. And when I got in, I hadn't quite closed the door yet. And I said, "Well, it's a pleasure to meet you, sir." And as I was closing the door, you said, "Don't slam But it was too late.
It's a very old Mercedes. You just shut the door very closely.
And I closed
slowly.
it, and the wood paneling on the outside
Oh.
fell off and hit the road.
Oh.
And then a
Oh,
lady
God.
outside at the airport ran up and grabbed the wood and said, "You dropped this," and handed it through the window.
Because in those days, Mercedes were the inside of the car. The doors had all these real wood strips. They
Oh, yeah.
weren't plastic wood. They were made
Yeah.
out. They're made out of wood. But I don't remember that. But thank you for that.
I just felt so embarrassed because I was like, well, this is the first time I meet him, and I'm already breaking everything.
Well, anyway, Drew stayed with us for a week, and I do remember that when you went back. Now, maybe I shouldn't say this, but and maybe you don't even know this. But after we
Go
dropped
ahead.
you off at the airport and you
I was
flew back
crying.
to California,
Tears down my face.
we were driving back. It's an hour's drive from Orlando to Melbourne Beach,
Mhm.
and let's stop for a breakfast or something. We stopped on the way, and Louise was absolutely sobbing, and I thought, "Oh wow, this must be love." She was really crying, and I didn't know
I
how
think
to
we
console
both.
her.
I was probably crying harder. I think.
The captain says, "We're going to have to turn around. We've got a passenger who is bawling. We can't stop him."
I feel bad for the past because I remember being on the middle seat
Yeah.
on that flight. So there were two people sitting next to
And
me.
they're
and I-
offering you Kleenex.
yeah, just watching me cry because that was the first time Louise and I were together as a couple, and that was our first, I guess, big goodbye because I didn't know when she was going to come back yet.
But as it turned out, it would have been about a year or so later, you came to visit us again in Florida, but I think you had some other mission in your mind that I didn't know about. But, you know, it was a nice visit. We had a good time. I think you celebrated my birthday.
It was around
there.
this time,
No, it
2
was-
years ago,
Yeah, it was
right?
my birthday. Was it 2? No, 3 years. It must have
which
been.
is July,
It
right?
would have been 3 years ago.
3 years ago now.
Yeah.
Wow. So
Yeah.
it was July of
Yeah, my
18.
birthday is in July.
Uh-huh.
So you came over and you celebrated your birthday with me, and Louise came with you that time.
That's right.
And the day after my birthday, can I continue with this story?
I don't remember, but go ahead.
The day after my birthday, you came down and says, "I'm a little bit bleary-eyed, a little partying too much the night before."
Oh, I remember where this.
And Drew says, "Did you call me Pete or Mr. Pete? I forget. I don't know what it was, but you were very respectful,
Probably Mr. Smith
or something like
Something.
that." You said,
Very formal.
You know, can I tell you something? And I said, "Uh-oh, here it comes."
I think you said, "Am I in trouble?"
"Am I in trouble?" He says, "Well, I've known Louise for a couple of years now, and as you know, I'm very fond of her, and I'd like to ask for your permission for her hand in marriage." And I just gave you a little poke in the tummy. I said, "Go for it, bro."
We remember that story
Yeah.
differently because
Oh,
that's
you
not
do?
what I
Oh,
remember.
yeah, you tell me your side.
My side was, well, you had a big smile on your face.
Whoa.
There was no ill intent. You were very approving of it the first second I asked. You were ecstatic and very excited, but you
course.
sarcastically said, "Well, I better go ahead and kill myself."
No,
or something
did I say
like
that? I
that.
didn't say that.
He's convinced that's not what happened. Maybe I'm misremembering, or that's just how my brain interpreted it. But you got, basically, right as I asked, you got up right away and gave me a big hug. So I was very thankful. And, because I didn't know what to do if you said no. There wasn't much of a backup plan
You weren't
there.
ready for like an argument or some contentious like, okay, if that's the way it's going to be, I'm going to marry her anyway.
I was wondering if I had the confidence to go into it that way of like, well, I guess I'm telling you we're getting married, whether you like
Is this
it
a
or not.
question? I should have said, is this a question or a statement?
Yeah, that would have been a better response, but
Yeah.
it didn't matter because you
Yeah.
approved anyway. But
It worked out well, and that night we went, our friends in Florida, in Melbourne, we went to a beautiful German restaurant to celebrate. Holly and Rudy were there.
Edelweiss.
Edelweiss.
Shout out to Edelweiss. They're an amazing,
German restaurant, Bavarian restaurant in Melbourne, Florida.
just incredible
If
food.
you're ever driving down US 1 from Canada to the Keys,
Mhm.
stop in, and you're not on Interstate 95, you're on
Mhm.
US 1, stop at Edelweiss. It's only open 3 days a week, so the
Right.
chances of it being open while you're driving through, the chances of you driving through even are pretty slim, but if it happens
Do you
to
know
be
how
open...
to spell it? It's a weird
Yeah,
spelling.
it's like the spelling of the flower.
Oh,
It's
okay.
a German flower, Eidelweiss.
Gotcha.
It's a German, or actually it's an Austrian national flower.
Oh,
It's
okay.
grown in the
Wow.
mountains and the fields,
Uh-huh.
and wildflower, Edelweiss.
Both times we went to Florida, we ate
to
there,
Edelweiss.
and it was amazing both times with
And
the,
they had
the
this
schnitzel and the
Brilliant
applesauce.
Jaeger
and-
schnitzel and a black
Oh.
forest cake afterwards, and
Mm.
the Jaeger schnitzel's to die for if you're familiar with that. It's
Oh,
a
yeah.
really good dish. It's very well known in Brevard County,
Mhm.
and that's the county where the Kennedy Space Center is. And by the
That
way,
was cool.
on that trip, you made you and Louise went for a drive up to the Kennedy Space Center, which is about 30 miles north of where I lived at
With
that
the top
time.
down in your
The convertible.
what car was that?
Mercedes.
Oh, it's another Mercedes.
Yeah.
So
I'm
we
a
got two
Mercedes junk.
Mercedes.
3 I've got now. I didn't know, or 4 at one point.
Really? 4 Mercedes
Yeah,
at
and
once?
now 5, 1 in Australia as well.
Oh my god.
I just sold the one in Australia
Oh,
just
you sold
weeks
it.
before coming here.
Wow.
Like, no, a couple of days before I got on the plane to come here last
Oh
week.
wow. Man, they'd probably be interested in your thoughts on the EQS then.
I don't. I
Probably
only
don't
know
know.
about old Mercedes.
Okay.
Because in those days,
We'll talk about it in 40 years.
the first Mercedes the oldest one I've got is 1967 Heckfloss, and Heckfloss is the German word for tail fin.
Oh, okay.
And the Germans in the 1960s thought that the American cars like the Chevrolets and the Buicks and the Fords, they all had these tail fins, and they were in vogue in the 50s and 60s. So they decided to put a tail fin on their model cars, their sedans, back in the 1960s.
Like a plane.
Well, they're vertical fin. Yeah, a bit like
Kinda.
a plane. So if anybody's interested, and you can look it up, say 1967 230S Heckfloss, Heckflosse, and you'll see it's got tail fins on the back, and I love those tail fins. But by the 1970s, that style went out of vogue, and each successive year the fins got smaller and smaller until they completely disappeared.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, we were driving to Kennedy Space Center.
Oh, that's just one of the trips, and what I was going to say, that Drew and Louise made a video of that trip, and I find it very humorous. It's on YouTube. I don't know what number it is.
This channel?
This channel.
We gave up on the numbers because there were so many vlogs, so now it just...
So if you wanted to look up that particular video that you made of the trip to the Kennedy Space Center and NASA,
I'm guessing...
would you just Google Tailosive
Space Center.
Space Center, something like that?
Probably something like that. It'd show up on this channel. But yeah, that was a fun day. We got to see the Saturn V all stretched out on the ground, and then a mock-up of the shuttle, and they had a simulator that you sit back in and everything. And Randy is in the chat. You remember him from the last time?
Oh,
you were
yeah,
here.
yeah. Hi, Randy.
How
are you?
He's watching. And Mike, who you saw just a few days ago.
Okay.
Model Y.
Oh, Mike down at well, I'm not allowed to say.
I don't think he cares as much. But yeah,
down in Santa Cruz.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
He says, hope you're enjoying the heat.
I wish I was there at your pool.
Yeah, we had fun at the
Love
pool.
your pool. And by the way, when we left your place, we went down to the Santa Cruz Pier, and that was just awesome.
Oh, that was
What
cool.
I really got a kick out of was when we were walking out on the pier, and these big dump trucks came driving down the pier, and the whole pier was rattling away. I felt like I was on a train, and the thing was going to collapse into the water. Because these trucks weigh like 15 tons. You know?
And you were joking that they were going to dump the trash in the ocean.
Right.
They're just coming out to the pier to dump all the garbage away.
Actually, they had big skips, big dumpsters out on the end of the pier, so the trucks were actually taking the trash from the restaurants.
Dropping them off.
But going back to the Space Center, there's one more thing about that video.
Yeah.
When, if you ever do look it up.
He did, Ben Close found it. He linked it in the chat. So
awesome. So thank you, Ben, for doing that.
Anybody wants to watch it,
There's one little particular moving part, and I think it's the same video,
Mm-hmm.
where you're actually down on the beach and you're actually proposing to her, and you get down on
Oh,
your
yeah,
hands
we
and
do have
knees,
that one.
You pull the ring out of your back pocket, and you get down. I thought that was really in the sun. Well, it was right on the beach. There was not another person on the beach.
And that beach was the first place we kissed. So it was
it's a very significant place.
beach, yeah.
And then you went up onto the roof of my house and watched the sunset after the Edelweiss
Yeah, you always had a ladder up there.
Yeah,
on the
because
second floor.
that was a really beautiful location. The house was terrible. It was such a badly built house. I'm glad I saw. I hope the new owner is not watching.
We loved that house.
It was a huge house, way too big for one person.
One
I spent
person,
like 5 years remodeling it, restoring it. Finally, I got to sell it just before COVID hit.
Oh, good.
But when you were over there, you'd love going up the ladder onto the roof because it was 3 stories high.
Well, you could see the ocean up there.
You could see the Cape. You could see.
Yeah.
That's a perfect place to watch the launching of the Falcon rockets.
Right. Did you ever get a catch a few from there?
I had tried with the camera I had wasn't good enough to catch them, but just watching it and listening to it.
I was really hoping we'd see one because they didn't have any Falcon 9 launches when we were. Sorry, it's just you're good. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, but the most amazing thing, I mean, I've seen the STS, like, when they launched the space shuttle from up there, it was nothing like the Falcon rocket's launch.
Oh, really?
The Falcons were much more loud and
Oh,
vibrant and just explosive.
Uh-huh.
And then you could watch the arc as it took off from the Cape, and it went almost over my house. I looked to the north because I was about 30 miles south.
Yeah.
But you could fly it over. You could see it fly over the house and then head towards down the south as it joined the equatorial orbit. But
Wow.
about 5 minutes later, the sonic boom would hit the house.
Oh,
The
5 minutes.
because it was so far away.
Yeah.
At the speed of sound, it would take 5 minutes, and then the windows in the house would start rattling.
Oh,
Even
my
the
goodness.
house would you could almost feel like a minor earthquake.
Do you know if you were there for the Falcon Heavy launch?
No, I'd already sold the place.
Oh, it was gone
Yeah,
by then.
yeah.
Okay. So it was a while ago then.
Yeah, it was.
Was that launch pad Cape Canaveral? Or is
Yeah,
that a
Cape.
different-
That's Cape Canaveral.
Okay,
That's the
right.
Cape launch pad A or B, depending on which one.
Right. Yeah, that would have been cool to see. I've still never seen a Falcon launch, but I watch them every.
I watched the original Falcon, the
every
one,
live stream.
not the massive one where he had 3 in 1.
Not the heavy, but
Not the heavy,
just the
regular.
9.
In
yeah.
those days, he was just testing the 9s.
Mhm. And now they're like
3 times as big.
as active as 737s.
I know.
They're
yeah.
just every other week they're sending them up and landing them, and that's how you guys are watching this broadcast is through Starlink.
That's-
So
Well, the good thing is, I mean, for the most part, I'm a big admirer of Elon Musk because he's continually thinking outside the box.
oh yeah.
He's coming up with ideas that the average person like me was, oh, that's ridiculous. How could you do that? But it turns out, and you know, like he can put per pound or per kilo into space much cheaper than if you get the government to do it, like
Oh, yeah.
NASA.
Substantially.
So it was a good idea for the government to sub it out and get somebody who's a really smart rocket scientist. I mean, I'm not
Yeah.
being cliche or
no.
you know, like that's what he really is a rocket scientist.
And they can rapidly change their engines and their designs
it's
and
a very, very dynamic kind of operation. And
For
if
sure.
they realize, like this recently, he launched the new one
Starship.
and exploded. The first one
The first 4.
exploded, and that's good because it's like when you're learning to swim, and until you actually crash in or start to drown, you don't know what it's like. You've got to have some accidents and bumps along the way
Right,
to
that's how you
learn from
learn.
them.
Exactly.
So anyway, having a private company do that was a fantastic thing for
Mhm.
the space industry in the US.
Joseph's asking if you're techie at all.
No. Yes, of course. My degree is in electrical engineering, so yes, I have.
Probably techie, not in the way they're expecting, because they think me is techie, but I don't do much engineering. I'm just an Apple guy.
When I was doing my training in electronics and telecommunications, computers basically didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
But they were in their infancy, and I know how computers work in the sense of what's going on with Boolean algebra and NOR and OR gates,
Mm-hmm.
and what's actually physically happening, what an AND gate is. And a NAND gate
Mm-hmm.
is the fundamental tool or fundamental element of a computer. And if a microchip that's a processor
Yeah.
has literally got millions of these gates inside, and it's just basically binary gates. If you've
Right.
got 2 1s on the input, you're going to have a 0 on the output. And if you can make a lattice of millions of these gates
Mm-hmm.
with all the different 1s and 0s that are going in, you get, and this is happening millions, hundreds of millions of times a second. This is what a processor is. So
Yeah.
I know how the basic elementary component of a computer works, but I don't know how to write code.
Oh, yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Because
That
code
makes
didn't
sense.
exist in those days. It was like, I remember when the first computer came out at Radio Shack, it was called the TRS-80, and it was so basic. It had 8K of memory. You know, 8 kilobytes of memory, and now we're
Wow.
talking about terabytes in an iPad like that.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. I guess that kind of answers Rockford Media's question of what do you do for a living. But you've had dozens of jobs, right?
Well, the most of my life, my bread and butter has been in telecommunications, basically satellite networks. In fact, since I saw you when we had the last chat, which was almost 3 years ago, I spent 6 months in Africa working for the US government, just setting up satellite networks in Cameroon, which is a beautiful country in the center of Africa.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the sort of guy that you could say, here's a satellite, like 4 or 5 crates of satellite equipment, put it on a plane, take it with you, set it up in the middle of Africa, and then suddenly you've got a little village with 500 users that have high-speed internet.
Wow.
And I hooked it up, and it goes back to a teleport in the US, and then it's as if they're in their living room at home in the US.
In terms of bandwidth and speed.
Well, the bandwidth, it depends. If you've got 500 users,
Sure.
they're all streaming Netflix. It's a little it's susceptible to some blockages there. It's not
down.
like your Starlink.
Yeah, it's cool that they made it so simple and easy that even a dummy like me can set it up.
Well, you're no dummy.
Well, I don't know. I don't have a degree in engineering or anything like that, but they made it so simple now to the point of it's just pointed at the sky and it does the rest.
And actually, that's a really good subject you brought up. We better look at the questions, but I
Sure.
can talk about this forever. And it's like the evolution of telecommunications in the time that since I started in it in the 70s up until today.
Mm-hmm.
At FedEx, we're making lower emission vehicles our priority because Earth is our priority. Our goal is to be carbon neutral by 2040. We call it Priority Earth. FedEx, where now meets next. At FedEx, we're making lower emission vehicles our priority because Earth is our priority. Our goal is to be carbon neutral by 2040. We call it Priority Earth. FedEx, where now meets next.
Peacock is streaming your favorite shows, movies, live sports, breaking news, exclusive originals, and every live WWE pay-per-view. It's The Office, Chris Lee Knows Best, and Peacock original shows like Punky Brewster. Peacock, watch for free, upgrade for more. Stream now at peacocktv.com.
The philosophy of the science is to try and compact and press as much data as you can through the minimum amount of spectral bandwidth.
Right.
And then, like, just to put it in perspective, there's two terms of bandwidth. The guys, your audience might know bandwidth is how many megabits per second.
Sure.
Okay. There's another term of bandwidth which I'm more familiar with. I am familiar with that, but the other term is, if you look at the satellite, it's got a bandwidth of 500 megahertz, not megabits.
Okay.
And it's actually got that twice because you use
That's the
different
wavelength of the frequency?
The way that you measure bandwidth on a satellite is you look at the lowest frequency that it can receive to the highest frequency. Let's say it's 14 gigahertz to 14.5 gigahertz. That 0.5 gigahertz is 500 megahertz.
Yeah.
And that means that satellite has 500 megahertz of bandwidth. And the way a satellite is constructed and designed, it's got multiple transponders, you can say channels, and normally they're about 40 megahertz apart. So if you get 500 and you've got 40 megahertz apart, that's about 12 different channels. There's a little guard channel between each one. So you've got about 12 channels on one polarization, and then the other polarization you've got another 12 channels. So you've got a total in effect of 1 gigahertz of bandwidth.
Yeah.
Now, with the methods of modulation that have been developed in the last 15 or 20 years, we've gone completely from analog to digital. Now, a lot of people, when I remember when digital was coming out, they thought, well, I'd hate this digital stuff. But when you consider this, one of those 40 megahertz channels in the old day could carry one TV channel, one analog TV channel, not even HD. The
Like
old
a low quality.
yeah. What's it called? Standard definition,
Yeah.
NTSC, which is the old technology in the United States. It dates back to the 1940s. And if you had a TV in the 1970s or 80s, it would be called NTSC, which I thought stood for Never the Same Color, but it actually stands for the National Television Standard Committee.
Wow. Those two acronyms work really well,
Yeah.
though. Never the same color.
But anyway, the 40 megahertz in those days bandwidth on one transponder or one channel would just be good enough for one TV channel. Now, because of modern modulation techniques, you can fit in 1/7 megahertz, which is a fraction of the 40 megahertz, you can compress 2 HD TV channels, 3 standard definition channels, and about 20 audio channels, all in just one tiny fraction of the original 40 megahertz transponder. So that 40 megahertz transponder now has multiple transport streams using that one fraction of the whole gigahertz of the satellite available bandwidth.
Yeah.
And each one of those transport streams could be coming from one TV channel or one thing like Netflix or
Sure.
whatever. And how they use that 7 megahertz, they could have like 3 HD channels or 2 HD channels and several standard definition channels and not hundreds but dozens of radio channels like MC Music or whatever.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, so that to me, and also the other thing is, those of you who've been around for a while, if you remember back to the 90s and the 2000s, satellite dishes used to be so big, like the TVROs, television receive only dishes that used to be on the roofs of houses, they were like 12 or 14 feet in diameter.
Wow.
Nowadays, because of increased technology in the low noise amplifiers, the noise temperature, in other words, the noise that's developed by the amplification process is so much less. In the 80s, you used to have to put a cryogenically cooled amplifier. There had to be a refrigeration system to keep the amplifier
just to cool it
at a certain degrees Kelvin, which is above, like a few degrees above absolute zero, in order to get the noise of the amplifier reduced so much that it could actually detect the signal coming from the satellite.
like Freon or something, some kind of.
Well, we didn't use Freon. We used helium.
Helium.
Now, helium is that gas that if you breathe it, it sounds like Donald Duck.
Right. Yeah.
I was never brave enough to try that. I didn't want to sound like Donald Duck anyway. But
Well, if you do, we'll record it and post it somewhere.
So anyway, that's
wow.
Some of the advancements in the last 20, 30 years are just phenomenal. And I can't even, the technology of television and telecommunications is amazing, even if I don't like a lot of the intelligence or lack of it that's going over it.
Sure. I'm excited for Starlink rolling out to more people now, just because it's showing how satellite internet can be done in a way that's high bandwidth for
it's still available
anybody.
to the masses.
Yeah. Anybody can connect to it from anywhere, like in the middle of the ocean or on a plane.
Or if you think about it, even in the United States today, without the satellite network, there's a very large infrastructure of, baseband or broadband communication.
Cellular, yeah.
But a lot of countries in the world don't have it. And I've spent a lot of time in Africa where people don't even have cell phones. There's no such, not even 3G.
Yeah.
And so the concept of having, suddenly coming from the Stone Age to having massive high-speed data availability in sub-Sahara Africa or India or Russia or all the places that are still developing and are still pretty much out of the way, it's just a huge quantum leap from having nothing to having massive. Whereas in the United States, and it's always been like this since the 1920s, the US has sort of gone stepping stone, and every new technology comes and overtakes the one that happened a few years earlier. So if you look at this infrastructure of telecommunications in this country, it's sort of a hodgepodge and a mix and a hybrid. You got people with cable coming into their house,
fiber.
And now there's this HFC where you've got the cable and fiber, the hybrid.
Yeah.
And I mean, some countries in like Africa, they could completely do away with all those intermediate steps and go from nothing to having a Starlink, and then everybody's suddenly got 150 megabits per second available at their disposal.
They could live stream like this.
Yeah, from the Sahara Desert or something.
Right. That's an easy way to leapfrog trying to build out all that infrastructure.
But I also think that's a benefit that they've had struggles so far, and they don't have the education system and the money investment in development in this country is just the rest of the country, the rest of the world can benefit from it.
Oh yeah, for sure. To have more people involved, and there's still, I think, several billion people on Earth without internet at all.
Exactly.
It's crazy to think about how massive every site is and how much activity we have on YouTube or on Twitter or on whatever, and that's still I think we're close to halfway or around halfway to getting everybody connected.
Potentially, yes, but of course the equipment like you have, the Starlink, it's not available in Africa yet, but I envisage in the next 4 or 5 years, at least in the next decade, the cost per unit of those devices will come down substantially.
Right.
And it might not be affordable to every individual in the third world developing countries, but villages could afford them, and then they could break it out so that many people in that village could have a good high-speed access, just sharing the one satellite dish.
Yeah, and that's always, I think, fundamentally going to be a lot cheaper than having to run
Fiber.
fiber or
Absolutely.
some
Yeah.
other type of cable way out in the middle of nowhere. If they know that, as long as the terminals are cheaper than that,
Yeah.
they're going to be worth it.
I
for
think the
many.
biggest issue, and I think Elon has got a good handle on it, and I think he's very good at predicting the future, is that the limiting factor is not the hardware or even the development and the speed of the hardware, but the availability of the bandwidth on the spacecraft. Now, his way of doing it is, once again, he's great at thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
He's going to have a whole constellation of low Earth orbit satellites that are constantly overlapping each other and crossing each other.
And they just finished the first shell.
Yeah, right. And then maybe he'll have a different layer. I'm not really that familiar with it, but maybe he'll have a different layer that's traveling at a different orbital speed.
I think that's the plan.
And
yeah.
then that they will. And the other thing that I believe that they're doing is, instead of the satellite, like your station here, your ground station here, going to a satellite back down to a hub, which is like a big hub and spoke kind of architecture, each satellite itself becomes a hub.
Right.
And the satellites are communicating to each other. So the constellation of satellites is forming like a net over the planet. It's just not point A to B, it's point A, then hop to another satellite, to another satellite, to another satellite, till it finds the fastest route to its destination to decrease the latency. That's another issue that's always been a problem with satellite communications, is the latency. That's the delay it takes from getting, and they can only travel at point A to point B at the speed of light.
Right.
And geostationary satellites are at 26,000 miles above the planet. By the time it gets up and back down to the Earth station, that's about 3/4 of a second. You know,
Which in the internet world is basically forever.
yes, it is, and
It's
especially if
super
you're
slow.
talking. Because I could say, "Hello, are you there?" and you don't hear anything because it takes 1.5 seconds for his
Right.
voice to come back to you.
Super delayed.
Yeah, so you're saying, "Hello, hello, nobody there," hang up.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, your answer is still coming back. You know,
Right,
it's
it takes that
he's lost
long.
it.
Yeah.
But with the low Earth orbit that Elon is using now, the latency is much shorter, because the orbit of the satellite is, instead of 28,000 or 26,000 miles, it's 150 miles. You know, it's a low Earth orbit. It's just up there where the space shuttle used to be.
Right. It's weird to think how close that seems. When you think 150 miles on Earth,
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like that far of a drive. But if you're going straight up, that's
very far.
very way up into
Yeah.
space already. You don't have to go very many miles to get into low Earth orbit. But yeah, I think that is the plan. They should call it Skynet from Terminator, is what they call it.
Oh, that's
You
that'd
have
be
the network.
plagiarizing a name from a movie or something. You can't do that.
Well, they had the Falcon rockets were named after the Millennium Falcon.
Oh, okay.
And then the Plaid Model S, which just came out, the super
car.
fast model, that's from Spaceballs.
Oh, so
This
this
plaid.
this is modern day technology. I don't know. Yeah,
They just name stuff after movies all the time. That's why I'm like, just call it Skynet and say
Yeah.
it'll take over someday.
All right, very good.
Yeah, I read the terminals right now are costing them like over $1,000 a piece.
This is like the terminal you've got.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably in the grasp of most American families, especially if you're in an area where you have poor internet, like by cable or fiber.
Well, and they're selling it for $500.
Yeah.
So they're losing money on the initial.
Yeah, but what they're doing, and that's good marketing on Elon's part, because he's actually developing. That's called marketing. Not. There's a difference between marketing and sales. Marketing is getting people to know and become familiar with your product.
Right.
But sales is just selling it, saying, "Oh,
Yeah,
my
yeah.
commission is 5% or whatever."
Right.
Marketing is developing the product and developing the market. And that's what he's doing. And even if you're selling the first 500,000 of those Earth stations at a loss, eventually there'll be so many of them that the momentum will pick up. And there's two factors. One is that the public will generally become more dependent on that technology, and secondly, by producing more and more of them, the cost per unit can come down.
Right,
He
right.
can keep the sale point at the same point, but the
More
margin is
profitable over time.
but the margin is getting better and better and better, because he's producing more that the cost per unit is less, the margin is higher.
Right.
And eventually,
Get there.
then he can start reducing his sale point down, so keep the margins good. But by then, the technology is completely taken over, and and cable and fiber and every other form of distribution of the internet will be obsolete.
I hope so, because I'm sick of Comcast.
Well, that's true.
Wanted to get off them as soon as possible.
And even in my country, we're pretty fed up with the local telephone providers. They're
But they have a monopoly a lot, right? They
not
have no
so
one else
much.
to switch.
Well, for the rural areas, they have pretty much of a monopoly, but urban and city areas definitely not.
Oh, sure. Cities have
But
several options.
because
but-
of the population density.
Well, Mike had an interesting question. He asked if you could go back to school and study a topic other than electrical engineering, what would it be?
Well, Mike down in Los Gatos,
Yeah.
you got me stumped there.
Well, you've been training a lot in the past few years for flying, right?
Well, I've got two passions. One is electronics and telecommunications, and I just want to say one more thing about that in a minute. But certainly, my passion is flying and
the Concorde.
Yeah. I've taken off the Concorde and landed it. In fact, I was the pilot of the one that crashed.
That was him.
Just kidding. No, I've never. I've seen the Concorde in real life. I was driving around Heathrow one time after I got off a flight from the US.
Yeah.
And there was a boom gate, as I remember, right in front of the road that runs around Heathrow Airport, and it's shut. And right in front of me, there was this tug, and it was towing the Concorde right across in front of me.
Oh, wow.
So I've seen the Concorde, but it wasn't supersonic.
Yeah.
It was going about snail's pace, walking.
I checked that one at the Aerospace Museum, I think in Seattle.
Oh, okay.
They had one that you could walk on, but it was obviously decommissioned and everything. But yeah,
Yeah, it was
It's
a
cool looking.
static display. But anyway, what I was going to say, Mike, answer your question, I just think there's too many things. Life is not long enough to do all the things that I wanted to do, and I think most people feel the same way.
Oh, sure.
I would love to be a pilot. My brother-in-law, who was the pilot when we came over in the 747 from Sydney, he taught me a lot about what it's like to be an airline pilot, and it's really not hard work. I mean, it's really hard work. You have to be incredibly disciplined and obviously safety. I love the idea of a pilot, but I can't really imagine myself being an airline pilot.
Yeah.
I just don't think I'm disciplined enough. I am a helicopter pilot, and I have been flying recently, got my winch endorsement, my sling load endorsement, low altitude endorsement in Australia, just in the last month or so. And
Wow.
and
So
what
you're still learning.
no, I'm still learning.
Yeah. It
Still
doesn't
learning.
stop.
And I want my, because now I know where you and Drew, you and Louise are very well established here, and I'm tempted to live in the neighborhood and
That would be awesome.
and then get a job flying. And this morning, me and my friend here, Ken, we went out looking at the agricultural aviation operators here in this neighborhood. There's a lot of them because it's a very rural and agricultural area.
Right.
We're looking at the crop dusters, and the helicopters were coming in with the big spray booms on, and
And you met him yesterday.
Yeah, I only met
For
him
the record.
yesterday. Yeah.
You guys go.
Yeah, well, it's like we've known each other for 40 years.
But that's
And,
cool. I'm glad you got to see it all.
So I'm very pumped, and luckily tomorrow in the county there's a aviation show, what's it called?
Air show.
Air show.
Yeah.
A fly-in. So I think it would be a good thing to go tomorrow morning. Drew and Louise will come there, take
Yeah, I
me
think
there
so.
tomorrow,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we'll maybe make some videos of some really neat aircraft.
That would be cool.
Yeah, and chat with some of the old, like we met an old aviator this morning, Clarence, and he
Victor.
yeah,
And Clarence.
that's right. We got that Clarence.
What's your Victor?
He was just like such a neat old guy. He had this hearing aid on, it's stuffed inside his ear, and I knew he was a little bit hard of hearing, but he must have been flying crop dusters in the 1930s.
Oh, wow.
No, I'm joking, of course. But he
That's what my grandpa.
he knew your grandpa.
Yeah, you were
That's
telling.
right,
That's cool.
yeah.
That's amazing.
So anyway, they have these hangars full of these beautiful ag planes. They're biplanes, and they've got a gas turbine up front, like the Pratt and Whitney at 900 horsepower, 900 shaft horsepower.
Wow.
They got loads of power,
Uh-huh.
and they carry thousands of liters of whatever it is, their spraying. I don't know if it's chemicals or maybe it's just water
Yeah.
to water the plants. I don't know.
Pesticides or
But
whatever.
I don't think I'd like to be a crop duster. I love telecommunications, and what I've already explained is I love the way that the technology has gone. In fact, in my house in Australia, it's a little. I've got a lab set up.
Oh yeah.
And what it is this is my little hobby that I did in my 16 months of lockdown in
Yeah.
Australia. I only just got back to the US a week ago, and Drew and his friend Mike picked me up at the airport, San Francisco.
Your first Tesla experience.
My first time ever in a Tesla, thanks Mike.
Yeah.
And but in my house in Australia, what I was doing is I was streaming. No, I shouldn't say this because it's not exactly above board, but I was streaming US television. Like you could get any channel if you're a Comcast Xfinity subscriber,
Right.
which I am,
Uh-huh.
and I would stream it into my laptop and take the HDMI out,
Uh-huh.
and I'd put it into this television modulator. And what it did was it would strip down the HDMI into its ones and zeros, its bits and bytes, and it would reconstruct it and modulate it in exactly the same format as over-the-air TV. Like a lot of folks,
Uh-huh.
young people these days don't even know what over-the-air TV is, but if you can
We had it when I was little.
you
I
can have a
remember.
TV antenna on the roof of your house and you point it to the TV transmitter and you can get channel 2 or
Yeah.
you know,
The house you met my parents at last
they
last
had a
trip.
TV antenna.
They had a giant antenna. That's what we used growing up.
So there's either UHF or VHF, which
Uh-huh.
but anyway, so I
It
had
was
this
huge though. It was like
Yeah.
almost the size of a car on top of the house.
That's
Just
called a
point-
Yagi, that antenna.
Uh-huh.
But the bigger it is, it means the longer the distance it could cover. Like up in that house, you could probably get television signals from Sacramento or somewhere like that.
Yeah, yeah.
But anyway, so I've got this little. What it does, it's a modulator, and you can program into it what kind of modulation. I programmed in it exactly the same modulation standards as television in Australia.
Oh, nice.
Then I put it through a little 3-watt amplifier, RF amplifier, and then I piped it up to a TV antenna on the roof of the house. So all of my neighbours up in the mountains where I live, they could watch American TV in Australia.
There's a
Ads
missile
and
heading
all.
there right now.
Ads and all, like it's exactly if you're sitting in, in your living room in Florida or wherever. In
Now
fact,
when we go outside here, a SWAT team's gonna
No.
jump on.
oh, I may as well, you
We
may as well
found
put your
him.
cuffs on now.
We found him. Yeah.
So that's
cool.
I think if you do something as a hobby, it's fun.
Yeah.
But if you're actually doing it for work, it's a little bit more challenging. If you're an airline
Oh, sure.
pilot, it's not the same as flying around in a Cessna 172.
Mhm. Well, that's why they pay you.
I don't know if I answered Mike's question. I probably
No, yeah.
you probably
I
lost
think you
the
did.
plot right at the beginning.
No, I think you did.
Yeah.
Ben was curious what the risks with a satellite are. If someone makes a mistake in space or a meteor collides, could it knock out all the communications in an instant?
Wow, that's a good question.
My guess is the compromise is space debris. Basically, the orbit gets more full with because Starlink
yeah,
plans
there's a
on
lot of
having.
junk up there.
They have over almost 1,500 satellites already,
Okay,
just for Starlink.
that's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
It's becoming more and more of a prevalent issue now, as there's more and more nations that want to, build up their pride. And like China, for example, is launching lots of stuff up there. The Russians and the European Space Agency. There's so many organizations. Even India just launched a satellite or a spacecraft a few months ago that had something like 400 satellites on board. They were these
Wow.
little mini satellites.
Yeah.
And they get up there, and half of them get lost, and they can't find them. But the odds
They burn
are
up
that
in the
they'll,
atmosphere,
the
probably.
odds are that they'll be able to track at least half of them. So that's 50% success rate. There is a lot of space junk up there, but in order to keep that in orbit, they have to be constantly corrected. They have little rockets on them, little retro rockets, and once
Ion
they run out of
thrusters?
fuel, thrusters, tiny little thrusters,
Yeah.
and once they get out of fuel, they run out of fuel. This is the kind of fuel that you can't replenish with solar,
Oh. Okay.
because Newton's law, opposite, and for every action is an equal and
Yeah.
opposite reaction.
you lose it eventually.
You can't get that with solar.
Right.
You got loads of sun up there, and you got plenty of
Sure.
battery power, but you can have a little propeller on the outside powered by the solar, but it doesn't mean anything because you're in a vacuum.
Yeah, there's no air.
But
Right.
what happens when they run out of fuel and they lose control of them? They even can't track them. They can't find them. They'll fall out of orbit, and there is a space junkyard up there where it's just a natural phenomenon. I don't fully understand. I don't know if anybody understands it. I think it's something to do with the gravitational processes of the planet, but they get attracted to a certain point in the atmosphere, and then they just plunge into the ocean, and it's generally the Pacific, where it's not very, fortunately for us, not very populated.
Right.
But normally, space junk burns up in space, unless it's massive,
Exactly.
like the Skylab that crashed into Western Australia in
Sure.
1978.
Yeah.
The junk just burns up in space and disintegrates by the time it hits the planet.
And that's what Starlink satellites are designed to do.
So
they're
they
small
have,
enough that
they've built in their end-of-life process.
Yeah, and they have their own ion thrusters on board to adjust if they're on track to collide with something.
Oh, they're going
They
to
can-
sidestep.
Yeah, they can move to
Yeah.
the side or change their direction. And because there's so many of them, like every Falcon launch, there's 60 at a time. And then when Starship is operational, that's supposed to be like 400 at a time. There's so many that even if a meteorite or one was taken
There's
out,
so much redundancy.
you
Yeah.
probably wouldn't even notice. There might be a slight drop
In the
frame in
throughput.
it. Yeah. And while you're
Yeah.
live streaming, you might
Well, not
lose
even.
signal a
Because
second there.
there's
But
so much available bandwidth up
Right.
there that every bandwidth stream is duplicated somewhere else.
yeah,
And at
yeah.
at the decoding end where it's detected and distributed, it'll pick whichever one is the best.
Mhm.
And it's constantly comparing the two streams coming in.
Yeah.
And even though the latency may be different on both of them, it's adjusting that so that they're synchronized.
Mhm.
And when one fails, it instantly knows, oh, we've lost sync with this one.
Right.
Take the B one or the A one,
Sure.
whichever's failed, not failed.
But I'm less sure. His follow-up question was if satellites have protection against electromagnetic solar storms, or do those get pretty much wiped out?
Well, I'm not that much of an expert on that. I
Okay.
don't believe they've got any protection against any kind of
I didn't
foreign
think so.
interference.
Yeah.
Solar flares happen once a year,
Mhm.
and that is disrupted because the nature of a solar flare is it sheds RF radio information, radio frequency noise at such a large intensity that it overwhelms the actual desired signal that the receiver is trying to receive.
I see.
And also they have solar outages with satellites.
Mhm.
And if you're on a place on the Earth's surface and the satellite is directly between you and the sun is radiating a lot of RF noise. And if the antenna is pointing directly at the sun, trying to get the signal off the satellite, it'll be completely overwhelmed by the noise that's coming from the sun. Because the noise coming from the sun, the RF noise, is so broadband and so powerful
Yeah.
that it covers all bands, right from very
Wow.
low frequencies to very, very high X-ray and higher frequencies above that.
Yeah.
That doesn't matter what frequency your satellite is, the sun will overwhelm it.
Mhm.
But that's only when the dish is pointed at the sun.
Oh, I
and
see.
it's only for geostationary Earth orbit, normal like geostationary satellites. It's only once a year, and it's like a few minutes a year that
Okay.
particular, because the next day the sun will be slightly to the left or the right.
Right, yeah.
And it's only when the dish is pointed exactly
I see.
at the sun.
One thing I was confused about that I figured you might have an answer for is that we, growing up at that old house you met my parents at, for a while we had HughesNet,
Yeah.
because that was the only internet that was available, and obviously the speed was low and it was data capped, and we also noticed that if it was cloudy,
Yeah,
almost lost whole service. And with Starlink,
you don't get that.
we were getting 200 down in a hailstorm. It was
Yeah.
just raining, and really big hail
Okay.
pellets were hitting the dish, and it was still able to maintain a
I can
solid
answer the
connection.
first part of that question.
Okay.
I used to work for Hughes Network Systems,
Mm-hmm.
and they were the producers of HughesNet.
Mm-hmm.
The satellite band that they used was called KU band, which is a subset of K band.
Oh, okay.
And KU is probably the widest, most popular band, either the C band, KU. But KU's characteristic at on the downlink it's 11.5 to like 12.5 or 10 to 11.5 gigahertz.
Mm-hmm.
And it happens to be that at that wavelength is very much the same as precipitation.
Oh,
rain.
really?
So the raindrops and the moisture in the cloud absorbs the radio energy coming
really?
from the satellite.
Okay.
So you mentioned during clouds and
Yeah.
rain, that's what happens. KU band is very, very susceptible to, but C band on the other hand, the downlink is 4 gigahertz. It's a much longer wavelength.
Yeah.
Longer wavelength and lower frequency. 14 gigahertz or 10 gigahertz is a much shorter wavelength. The wavelength coincides with the precipitation
I see.
size. So C band is not affected, and I believe Starlink might be Ka band, which is a much, much higher frequency.
So it goes through all
It
that
goes through it. It's not and even if it's hail or big hailstorms the size of a golf ball, it'll penetrate right through that.
Which is, we don't get snow here, but people with Starlink use it in the snow, and it's got a heater on the front. It melts the snow.
Well, that's a different thing.
Yeah.
Coming through space is one thing,
Uh-huh.
and that's, you've got a path loss that goes from the satellite down to the receiving antenna.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that you just mentioned, if you've got ice on the dish, it deforms the shape of the parabola. So that's what happens there, is you're losing the parabolic gain of the antenna.
I see.
Yeah.
Which
And
on
the other
Starlink's
thing
is flat.
if you look, and I'm sure when you install, well, it's even though it's flat, it's
Yeah.
a phased array.
Yeah.
It's still going to deform it because you're
Adding to the shape.
You're changing the shape.
I see.
You're distorting the shape of the flatness.
Right.
The other thing is the LNA or LNB. That's a little device that's got the amplifier in it. Has yours got that or not?
I'm not sure.
It might
It's
be
hard to
built
tell.
into the phased
It's probably
array.
built in, yeah.
Yeah, but older antennas like DirecTV or HughesNet, they have what's called an LNB, and if there's ice on the face of the input of the amplifier, that will also dramatically knock out the signal, reduce
I
the
see.
signal.
Well, I guess as we're wrapping up here, Daniel's last question was if you were planning on getting a PPL, which I believe is personal pilots?
Private pilot's
Private
license,
pilot's
yeah.
license. For a small aircraft. Or
Yes.
is that on your agenda at all?
Me, I've already done that. I did
Oh,
that,
you've got it.
I did that in 1980.
Oh, wow. Good. So that answers that
Daniel,
question.
have you got any questions about taking on flying as a career or even getting a PPL? Ask away. I would highly recommend it if you're a young person and you just want to get a feel for flying and know what it's like. A PPL is something that most young people could get with it. Even you might have to borrow a little bit of money to do it.
Sure.
But having a PPL would really give you a good insight if you want to make flying a career or not. You might get halfway through it and say, "Oh, flying is not for me. It's
Sure.
just, I don't have any, desire for it." Like I
Yeah.
gave Louise a few lessons, and she decided she didn't want to be a pilot. And that's
Sure.
fair enough.
Sure. He said his dad's a pilot and he had 5 lessons for his PPL at the Cessna 152 in the
Right.
United Kingdom.
That's what I learnt in
Same
152.
152.
The 152 and a 172 are both very forgiving aircraft. If
Yeah.
you ever get in trouble, you just take your hands off the wheel and it'll
Yeah.
fly itself.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, as long as
He,
the engine's turning.
He studied 5 years ago. He had to stop because it's very expensive.
In the UK, yes.
But
Here it's much cheaper.
oh, that's good. I didn't know that. Mike has a very important question that you probably know the answer to.
Hi, Mike, again.
Do you think a kangaroo-powered generator is feasible?
Kangaroos are very, very strong, but they're not very smart, and they're a little bit stubborn. And if you try to get them to do something, they'll do exactly the opposite. They're not like a mouse and a little one of those little things that.
So if we had a big pen for kangaroos,
dynamic, yeah.
like an acre
Yeah.
for kangaroos, you couldn't get them to go on the.
I think
generator.
if you consider the amount of food that you have to feed the kangaroo and the amount of return of energy, your return on investment would not be good. You're better off just burning the food and making a steam engine out of it, generating steam.
Yeah. Maybe they could power the satellites with the kangaroos up there.
That would be fun, but you'd have to provide them with oxygen. And the good thing is that when they get sick of it, they could jump off.
Yeah, they'd go for a while too.
Yeah.
Well, do you have any final thoughts or final questions for them before we wrap up? As we're coming near the end.
I don't know much to say. I don't have much to say except I hope you find What was the guy who asked about the pilot's
Daniel Holloway.
Daniel. And anyone else who's looking for inspiration to be a pilot, I would recommend it. Even if you just want to be a PPL, do whatever you want, but and do whatever you choose, but just do it with passion, and do it with a mindset of I'm going to start this, but I'm going to finish it. If you decide that you're going to do your PPL, talk it over with your parents or your friends or your peers, and work out a plan so that you don't just jump into doing something and like 5 lessons later decide, oh, I don't want to do this, because all that money and effort and energy that you put into it's wasted.
Sure.
Whatever you do it with passion and finish it.
That's good. That's inspiring. Thank you. Kangaroos are solid fuel. I think that's the
We've
message.
covered a lot of bases today.
Yeah, we covered everything, but now we have some more people for you to meet after this. So thank you all for your super chats and your messages, and we'll repeat with Pete next time.
Repeat number 3.
Repeat number 3.
Bye, everybody.
Coming soon.
Yeah.
Take
Thank
care
you.
all.
Been thinking about McDonald's all day. Can't get it off my mind. I can already taste it. Ooh, got my mind on my mouth and my mouth ready for some Mickey D's deal.
There's a deal for every moment at McDonald's.
Right now, get 2 of your favorites for just $3.50. Mix and match a classic McChicken, a hot and spicy McChicken, or a juicy McDouble. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with combo meal. Single item at regular price.
At FedEx, we're making carbon capture research our priority because Earth is our priority. Our goal is to be carbon neutral by 2040. We call it Priority Earth. FedEx, where now meets next. At FedEx, we're making lower emission vehicles our priority because Earth is our priority. Our goal is to be carbon neutral by 2040. We call it Priority Earth. FedEx, where now meets next.